Welcome back to Mike's Motorworks, and we're getting back to basics. And what we're looking at is what it takes to get a vehicle that's been sitting up and running again. And while we did this before with John's Black Betty project, this subject is a little unique. It's actually the first time we've done something like this here on Mike's Motorworks. This is Dad's 1987 Honda Super Magna. Don't mind the dust because it has been sitting for a while. And this was a unique bike to Honda for two reasons. Reason number one was the co-designer. It wasn't confirmed until the recent few years that Arlen Ness, the famous bike designer, had his hand in designing this particular ride, which explains the raked fork front and of course the swept tailpipes. And what is also unique about this bike is that this is a result between a feud with Harley-Davidson and Honda. You see, back in the 80s, Harley-Davidson wanted America to tariff any motorcycle being imported that was larger than 700 cc's. And so that's exactly what Honda did, was they designed this bike with 700 cc's, but it's a V4 configuration. Let me tell you, this thing will seriously wind out. And this was their answer to Harley-Davidson. Since we're getting back to basics, there's a couple things that we need to check, and the engine will not run without these four elements: fuel, air, compression, spark. Again, that's fuel, air, compression, spark. So those are the elements that we're going to focus on today. And of course, we have lubrication to be concerned with as well. With the battery pulled, it's now time to go ahead and drain the old fuel. And there's two parts we need to drain here. We need to drain the fuel from the tank, which we could do directly from the petcock valve around that area. And we also need to pull the old fuel out of the carburetors. And that part is a little bit different. Again, this is just basic conceptual stuff. You know, when you do your own particular vehicle, whether it's a car or a motorcycle, your application is going to be different than ours. But the concept is drain your fuel from both the fuel tank and from the carburetors themselves. For this particular model, draining the carburetor bowls isn't too bad. On this particular engine, each cylinder gets its own carburetor. So for this cylinder bank right here, we have a carburetor here and on the other side. This right here is the bowl itself. And of course, you got your drain port right here underneath. See my finger kind of wiggling right there? We just simply connect a line, run it down to a fuel tank, and then turn this screw enough to open up the port there. If there's any fuel inside there, it'll drain straight through, past the valve into our tank. Now, if you're doing an automotive carburetor off the top of, say, a classic V8, your setup may be very similar to this. You have two different bowls here. Well, the bowls there are bowls right here. And then, of course, to get those off, it's a matter of taking off the fastener from all four corners. Slightly loosen it up, not all the way, because you want to try to preserve that gasket that's in there and let it drain out. Once it's drained out, on this side, which is the secondaries, I recommend pressing down on the pump here a couple times to ensure that all the fuel is coming out of the jets and that is completely drained. And you can do the same thing on the other side with the primaries right there. So again, take your fasteners off, pop the bowls out just slightly, pump the pumps, put it all back together, and boom, you are good to go. Now, if it has been sitting for a while and you don't have reusable gaskets, then you will need to make sure that you have some gaskets to replace here, at which point you will go ahead and pull these all the way off and replace those gaskets. With the fuel system initially drained, at least the tank drained itself, we're going to add some fresh fuel in there to kind of wipe away or get away all of the old stuff that's kind of left over, because we don't want that floating around inside the tank. So effectively, we're just going to add about probably a half a gallon of fuel back into the motor, fresh fuel, and then go ahead and let that drain out. We're also going to use that fuel to kind of flush out the carburetors as well. With the carburetors already being drained, this will effectively fill the carburetors with fresh, good fuel. With the fuel system dumped and cleaned out and we have fresh fuel in there, now it's time to take care of the other elements. Air has already been addressed because we have good air around us. And Pop said he changed out the air filter before it sat. So it had some maintenance done to it before it was seated and sat in the garage. So we're confident that the air filter is clean on this. He also says he went ahead and checked the spark plugs here, but we're going to do that with you guys to show you how that's done and the things that we're looking for. We're going to check coolant, and then we're going to give this thing a chance to fire up. So to check the spark plugs, obviously we're going to go ahead and pull the coil off here, pull the spark plug, and there's a couple things we're looking for. All right, so here's what our plugs look like, and at least this particular one, we're going to do this several times. And there's a couple things that we're looking at. One, we're looking at the color of the tip of the spark plug, and there is a little bit of carbon buildup on there, which is normal for a carbureted engine, but it's not heavy. We don't see any evidence that it's been running too rich or what have you. Now, these are iridium spark plugs, so we're looking at the tip, the very tip of the plug element itself, and of course right over here to make sure that everything is good. So at this point we're confident that we can get away with reusing these plugs. We are going to go ahead and clean up the edges here with a brass bristle brush to knock some of that carbon off, and then we're going to do this 4 more times before we check oil and top off our coolant. For those not familiar with motorcycles, the oil system is a little unique in motorcycle engines. In this case, the oil acts kind of like the transmission lubricant. In other words, the engine oil helps lubricate the clutches that change the gears inside the motor, which is right inside of here. To check the oil, you want to make sure that the motorcycle is standing straight up, but because Dad's working on the other side, we're not going to go ahead and do that. And effectively, you just check it like any other engine. Pull the oil dipstick out, which is right here. Go ahead and pull it all the way out. May take a couple twists. And then you look for your levels on here, right? And as you can see there, the mark is right in this spot. If it were to be standing straight up, it would be up to here. So we are good on our engine oil level. Make sure that's returned back to its home, and you should be good to go. So earlier on, we said that the engine requires a couple elements to run: air, fuel, compression, and spark. We already know that the air is in a good spot because Pop changed the air filter, which is underneath here, a couple years ago, so it's still in a good spot and only has maybe 2,000 miles on it, if that. We went ahead and replaced and flushed out the fuel. Okay, so we went ahead and saw us do that process for both the carburetors and the tank. Went ahead and checked our spark plugs, and then of course we went ahead and made sure that everything is lubed up. Next thing is, of course, looking at a couple other things like the vehicle engine turnover, so on and so forth. So that's our next step. We're going to go ahead and connect our jump box to make sure that we are running good and sound, and make sure everything else is good where we need it. So let's see what happens. There it goes. Got a tail light out. All right, might as well check the lights. Good. Good. Brights. Good. Check your rears. So it's the running light. The brake light itself is good. Yep. Left. Oh, that's right. Left. Yeah.
Hit a lot different than cars. Yeah.
Then this. I've always made a habit. I was taught, shut this off first. Don't immediately go down there because you get into a problem. Your first instinct is to come down to here where you're taking your hands off the handlebar. So always go up here first. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. Now, understand that each application is going to be different. Your situation is going to be different. Now, I mentioned compression, and obviously we're not having any compression problems out of this motor. Now, if the engine had been sitting a while or was suspect to compression, then you would definitely need to get yourself a compression tester kit and go ahead and check the compression on each cylinder to make sure it was running. But in this case, of course, we had a known good engine with known good compression, and as you just heard, it was running fine. So I hope this helps you out, and don't forget to keep on tuning in because you don't know what will happen next here on Mike's Motorworks. Thanks for watching.